Why I use the term SJW and why you shouldn't be one. A lot of people have a negative reaction to the term SJW and assume that anybody using it must be some sort of horrible racist or misogynist bigot or transphobic who doesn't want any sort of social progress to be made in any arena. These are usually the same people that think that PC people are just people who treat others with respect. How painfully naive and lacking of any sort of awareness they are. Are they on social media? Have they watched the TED Talk called How One Tweet Can Ruin Your Life by John Ronson? SJW stands for Social Justice Warrior, generally. But if you look into the Urban Dictionary definition, you'll realize that it mostly refers to behavior of people on the internet. Though it definitely extends to college campus protests for speakers they don't like and bullying Yale professors into resigning because they questioned whether Halloween costumes should have rigid authoritarian restrictions on level of offensiveness allowed on campus. The simplest way to tell somebody that they shouldn't be a social justice warrior is to remind them that social justice is rarely obtained by being a warrior. In a few cases, extreme and aggressive tactics have been suiting for the occasion and the change that needed to happen, but in today's day and age, it is absolutely not helping abolish misogyny to Twitter mob people into career ruin for misconstrued liberal jokes. Believe it or not, kindness and compassion can still get us somewhere if we are dealing with people who accidentally said something that somebody found problematic online. I'm gay and I've been doing queer activism and other such things for 20 years. Honestly, if the term SJW was around during the Bush years, I could have easily been called one. But that's because it was not cool to be PC all the time. It was uncool. That was the peak of the popularity of South Park, and people made homophobic jokes on the internet constantly. So I got annoyed. It wasn't just the occasional thing, but it was generally culturally acceptable, and if you objected to it like I did, you would be the one who was outnumbered. Whereas now, it's usually the reverse. The SJWs gang up on people more than anybody. One could easily say that the entire movement is defined by internet bullying of people that supposedly said something offensive. When Obama got elected, there was a huge cultural shift almost immediately. A lot of the people that thought it was cool to pick on people for their identities realized that maybe they had to get with the times. I think a lot of them never believed a black man would get elected as president. It's not so much that they were overtly racist online, because I honestly don't remember a whole lot of that back then. But flagrant hick-ass homophobes don't usually tend to have the best track record of being fully accepting of people that aren't white. After I didn't feel like homophobia was culturally popular on a greater scale, I mostly did what I always did, which was artistic projects. I also started focusing my work in a lot of directions that one could describe as social justice artistic activism, if they wanted to. I did music and theater work with almost exclusively queer people of many genders, including trans people of many varieties. I worked with many people of color, veterans, and a few people that were foreign. It was a great period, and I enjoyed it. Around 2012, everything really started to change. The Trayvon Martin case set it off, I really think. It's hard to say what it was exactly, but it seemed like everybody I knew who was studying in universities began becoming more and more paranoid about every little detail of racism, misogyny, and transphobia, and less concerned with the issues of homophobia, especially towards gay men, which can all be traced back to fourth wave intersectional feminism, of course, which really is the philosophical force behind the entire SJW movement. And it kind of hates gay men, and I get into that in other videos. It took a few years of seeing my friends turn on each other for me to realize this was a sincere problem that wasn't going away. Friends were calling their prior best friends racist publicly, accusing gay men of being bigger misogynists than straight men, and trans people flipping out over the use of the word tranny, all very suddenly. It wasn't just cis white men that were being attacked either. Black friends of mine would end up being called anti-black for some really trivial reason, even though they were anti-racist activists themselves. Trans women who still use the word tranny would be publicly called out and bullied. I was bullied myself because I objected to the idea that all homophobia was supposedly rooted in misogyny, the way some particularly femme guys claimed. Finally, I learned the term SJW, which describe people who parrot blog articles and run around online engaging in call-out culture. It made perfect sense. A lot of people think SJW culture is rooted in universities, but I think it's more strongly linked to internet and blogs, namely feminist blogs, because they are getting all the funding. Not positive where it comes from, but while feminists claim that feminism is not an organization, they certainly get a lot of cash and seem pretty organized. Anyhow, once it became clear to me that these people were obnoxious, I started speaking out a bit, but it opened me up to huge attacks from my predominantly feminist and SJW friend group. You see, I was queer and made a particular effort to do work with all different types of minorities, which meant that I acquired SJWs as my primary social sphere, even though I wasn't doing it because I shared this mentality, but rather just because I had the ethos in myself that sincerely always felt that diversity was a good thing, and that the best way to undo racism, homophobia, transphobia, and sexism was to create art that directly challenged it. I had never found much success in direct action protesting personally, though I'm not against it. However, I did know that if artists of a minority type represented themselves and made their voices heard in a positive way, that would have a positive cultural influence, because I saw that happening over the years. But you see, not everybody was on board with me. Many of the SJWs in my social sphere demanded me to be more of an activist than I wanted to be. They wanted me to attend protests to basically prove myself, even though I have a pretty strict no protesting rule for myself due to personal reasons that actually involve real PTSD. They also accused me of all sorts of privilege, basically forgetting the fact that I had used my relative privilege in the most positive way that I could think of, which was helping out artists who were less privileged financially and with an artistic education as I was. In short, once being a social justice warrior became more important than actually doing things that had a cultural impact and positive social change the way I intended to do with my art and artistic activism, everybody turned on me. And this included friends of mine that I had helped with their artistic careers. They literally betrayed me in more than one case, because of identity politics and SJW nonsense, like the fact that they thought I was privileged, or I thought that anybody could theoretically be racist. For that reason alone, I think it is very different to be somebody who is socially conscious or into social change, or maybe even into social justice, though the term is becoming kind of toxic usually. It's really different to be any of those things than to actually be an SJW. An SJW is a bad thing, period. And it is not synonymous with being a good person. It's just not. They are not just nasty and abusive in most instances, but they cut off their nose to spite their face while shooting themselves in the foot regularly. They attack their own allies and their own kind for sport. And they are imploding anything good having to do with the American left. Don't be a social justice warrior. Be the change you want to see in the world. Like and subscribe also. Thanks.